something else about the moon project. I don't know if they went back with any more stuff after that, because I never really followed after that, because they might have done some additional things. They said they had a bunch more flights that went, and then it stopped abruptly. But I do know that even the Nazis were on the moon, back in the 30s and 40s with aircraft, and I'm sure the U.S. and everybody else was there. So they went to the moon, but they just didn't do it on the Apollo program. Now, one of the interesting things about the moon is it's an artificial construct. For anybody that is not aware of this, the moon is an artificial construct, and it's hollow inside, and the U.S. government and other agencies set off explosives, low-charge explosives, and they crash vehicles. They put seismographs on the moon, whether it was manned or unmanned. They put these seismographs on, and they crashed a couple vehicles into the moon, and it just echoed. It reverberated like it was hollow. And then they did something like in the late 90s, they set off a charge that was like the equivalent of like 10,000 pounds of TNT, and they set that off on the moon. And what they found was they didn't get an echo like they did with smaller charges. What they found was the entire surface of the moon has vibration and impact dampeners in it, just like out in Colorado in the Cheyenne Mountain, where they have those offices inside. All those are set on a spring shock absorbing method. So if a nuclear bomb goes off outside the building, the building's going to shake like a big earthquake. But these springs that they have underneath all the flooring absorbs the shock. Well, it turns out the surface of the moon is made up of titanium and other exotic metals to protect the inside. So it's an artificial construct, largely covered with titanium, and the craters are artificial craters to make it look like it's a real moon, and the ones that weren't artificial are just dents. Where they had big impacts, the craters are actually dents, where the aluminum got dented but not broken through. And you'll see that in some of the writings. Scientists are wondering, well, why are these big craters so shallow? Well, it's because they hit titanium instead of mud. That's why they're kind of shallow there. Well, anyway, let me take a break here and see if anybody wants to add or comment about this. Anybody have anything to say about all this? Feel free to speak up.
Yes, thank you. This is really informative. This is Claudia in Texas, and I just wanted you to know you're right on, spot on. That's exactly the way it was. It just so happened I happened to work at NASA as a young engineering student back in the 60s. And one of the things that I noticed when going to work early in the morning or getting off work late at night, that there was a portion of the backyard of NASA in Houston that was decorated to look like the surface of the moon. And they would take out equipment, and they also had very large cameras and all kinds of photographic equipment. And the memo that went out to the general workers at NASA in Houston at the Johnson Spacecraft Center was, we're practicing for the moon rocket, and it looks just like it. And it did. It looked just like it, and you would see the astronauts in their suits, and you would see the lunar lander and all kinds of interesting equipment moving about. And it would all take place between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. before the morning shift got there. So, yes, a lot of stuff happened. And my other comment is that if you have research available to look into on reverse speech, when you play Neil Armstrong interview back on reverse speech, you hear him say, it didn't happen, it didn't take place, I didn't go. And so there are proofs out there, very scientific, and you can't deny it. So thank you so much for opening up the discussion.
Well, thank you very much for that, Claudia. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Just a question about who created the moon. What's its use and purpose for? What is it used for? Start with those if you know the answer. Anybody?
This is Claudia in Texas. I have a partial answer. Because our particular planet was discovered by the Orion population, the Orion people who were looking for gold, and they discovered a lot of it just laying on the ground on the planet Earth. They came here and took control of it. And so part of their need to deal with other extraterrestrials coming here and wanting gold too, they had to set up a place a staging area, where others could meet, talk, converse, and work out a plan to divide up the spoils. So the moon was constructed very cleverly. It looks just like a barren surface, painted gray, has shallow meteors, and they, imported dust around it to make it look real. But all of it is just part of it, a hologram that is available 24/7 for us to look at, and we get deceived. This is their plan, to deceive the human population of everything that we think is real is not.
Well, thank you, Claudia.
Thank you.
David Icke.
Thank you, Claudia.
Oh, go ahead, Val.
Yeah, thank you. That explains a lot. It's a staging area. And so, again, the purpose of, one question for probably Bob is, how do they, if we have been to the moon, how do we get through the Van Allen belt?
Well, when you're going through the, when you have the capability of deep space transportation, where you go through the Van Allen belt, well, with the craft, they can go around the Van Allen belts. They can go up around the poles, and they can actually go around the Van Allen belts and still get to the moon. The Russians, I understand, were getting to the moon in something less than half an hour, 30 minutes.
Okay.
I know that Semyasin or Pleiadians, before they left the planet, they were going back and forth from the Pleiades. It took them 7.5 minutes from the Pleiades, which is 500 light years. And the Russians, their craft, they were going over 10,000 miles an hour, and they could circumvent, or their bigger craft, they could actually go through the Van Allen belts at such a high speed that it would be less than an X-ray of exposure, going through the Van Allen belts. They could go through them so fast. There was, but it takes that technology. Here, sometime in the last 6 months or a year, they had a new astronaut, young guy, probably 30 years old, talking about the space program. And he let it slip. He says, "Well, one of these days we'll figure out how to get through the Van Allen belts with our public technology." And he let that slip out. But with the Apollo technology, that's gonna be a fatal exposure to the radiation. And you see some of the people today saying, "Well, the Van Allen belts don't have that much radiation." Well, they really do have that much radiation. One thing I was going to say about the moon was David Icke said that during a lot of these changes in the solar system, when they brought the moon in, at one time the Earth used to orbit the planet Saturn, and Saturn was the object of worship. And then something happened that caused the Earth to get located to a different spot, so they brought in the moon to put the moon around. All of a sudden, the Earth was no longer going around Saturn; it was going around our sun in a completely different orbit, and so they brought in the moon at the same time that physical change took place. And a lot of this is written about by Velikovsky in his books Worlds in Collision. I don't know if you ever read any of his books, but there were some really big catastrophes that actually took place. But David Icke says that before the moon was brought in, when Earth orbited the Saturn, all the reptilians were worshiping the archons on Saturn. And that's today one of the reasons why practically every symbol on the planet having to do with the reptilians and the Illuminati, they are symbols of Saturn worship. You know, they kind of worship the Saturnalia. And that's, I mean, like the crescent, like you see the hammer and crescent, you know, like on the Soviet flag. Well, that any crescent is symbolic of worshiping Saturn. The all-seeing eye that you see like on the dollar bill and all that kind of stuff, the CBS symbol, that is a symbol for Saturn. The Kaaba, the big black stone that the Muslims worship over there at Mecca, that is a symbol for Saturn. And David Icke goes into it very, very extensively. And he says the moon was brought in to amplify the signals that the people living on Saturn use to broadcast the information they wanted to broadcast into the subconscious of their subjects. And so, you know, I think one of the last times I talked, I said when I was a professor at a small university down on the south side of Chicago, one of our standing jokes with the students was we said that education is a process whereby the notes of the professor become the notes of the student without passing through the minds of either. Well, what the archons and reptilians do is they broadcast their thought processes right into our subconscious without passing through our minds. It's the same exact thing. It's broadcast through our DNA at the lowest levels. And David Icke says that, you know, since the Earth got relocated out away from going around Saturn, they brought in the moon to be an amplifier to amplify the signals from Saturn because it was so far away. And so they have amplifiers inside the moon that amplifies and transmits the same information into our subconscious. So we believe at the subconscious level, we believe that we're sinners and kind of buy into the religions and all these other things that they're trying to get us to believe in, which really isn't truth. But that was another construct of the moon. And I think that a lot of those craters are actually parabolic dishes, you know, for different wavelengths that they transmit the information, and they probably also have spying information. They probably have a lot of antennas that are used to collect information from the planet, and that's why the moon always faces the Earth, because that's the focus of the transmitters and receivers on the moon toward the Earth. So that's David Icke's input anyway. By the way, one of the things I was thinking the other day, you know, the question is, well, why did we never go back to the moon, you know, where people could start drilling into the moon and start mining it and all that kind of stuff? Well, I was thinking, well, if you owned a $20 million Learjet, how would you like it if somebody walked out to the airport with a bunch of drills and started drilling into your airplane just to see what was underneath? You wouldn't like that very well either. Well, the reptilians that own the moon don't want anybody drilling into their prize object over there and messing up with their plan. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting input. I don't know, does that help at all, Val, answer any of the questions?
Yeah, this is not something I've been learning in my history class at GCU, where I'm taking history. They didn't tell me any of this, so I'm glad I tuned in today. Thank you.
Well, anyway,
may I offer a side comment?
Go ahead, Claudia.
About the radiation belt. One of the ways they overcome that is that the reptilians with the very, very excessive technology, created portals. And I'm going to refer to that series Stargate that we watched from the movie where they walk through a ring and they're at the other planet. How they did this was there would be jump rooms positioned on the Earth and jump rooms exactly positioned on another planet. So if they wanted to go to the moon and bypass the radiation, all they did was walk into a jump room, dial in a number, and in a few seconds they would be in another planet, walk out of the room, no problem. So that might be one of the other ways they move about without having to deal with dangerous radiation levels and eliminate wear and tear on the body.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that Stargate program, like in the movie, that's the one in the movie. They found the Stargate out in the desert. Well, I should tell you that the CIA found one in the ice down in Antarctica. One that was 3 foot diameter, and it had the ring of very precious metals, and the center was 3 foot diameter precious stone. And when they activated it, would become kind of like a vapor, just like in the movie Stargate, and they could go through that also. And it took them a while to figure out where that one went, but they finally figured it out, and that was a smaller version of the one like in the Stargate movie. So, I mean, they're out there, they're out and about in those jump rooms. You know, a lot of that was developed through at Montauk, and like I said, my friend Pete manufactures these jump rooms for the governments. They know exactly how to do it. The humans actually know how to do it. So thank you, Claudia. That was an excellent comment.
You're welcome.
Well, anyway, the part of my topic today is the one world government. So I've showed you how the United States and Europe, the Russians, and they're kind of tied together, and how the Soviet Union fits in the scheme of things. Well, one thing I haven't really talked about is how does China fit in the scheme of things. Well, anyway, I was doing a search trying to find out more about the red dragons that Dwayne the Great Writer, Dwayne Hepner was talking about, and he said that that Dinar RV will not go through unless the red dragons of China approve it, and so there's a YouTube that you can watch. I watched a YouTube about all this, and there's a group of people, bankers in Europe, that are called the Rothschilds, and the Rothschilds are the ones who control the banking system. But anyway, the Red Dragons are a group of reptilians in China, and they are working with the other reptilians. And there's the Red Dragons, and there's the Green Dragons. And the Green Dragons they control the areas where you have green flags, like in the Middle East. The Iranians and a lot of the Middle East countries have green in their flags, and those are controlled by the Green Dragons. Anyway, so that's kind of how the governments are tied together. And as far as one world religion is concerned, the one world religion is you have Grog, who is on the mental plane, and he's a three-headed god. And Val, maybe you could explain who the three-headed god is for everybody. Could you take a minute and explain that to everybody?
Well, he's positioned himself. I mean, he's just like anybody else in a way, but he's worked himself up to a position of authority, control, power, through his ruthlessness, through his cleverness. And again, he's just like kind of any president here, working his way up through deals and brutality and everything like that. And then he finally came to this position of you could say on top of the creation worlds. I mean, he's not the very top, but he's for many people, the majority of people, he is the ruler, the God that people worship, and he has at least 3 attributes that we know of, and those are the good, the beneficial, the benevolent God who grants prayers and the wishes of people who bow down to him. He can do that too. He has the power to grant wishes and desires, and he'll do that once in a while just to give the people hope. And then there's the devil part of him, the evil part of him. That's basically he plays both sides. That's interesting about this fellow. He has both the devil. He is both the devil and the good guy. If you've watched Devil's Advocate, that movie with Al Pacino, that's kind of a good example of how he's actually both good and bad. And then on the side there, there's the influence, and that's the sum total basically of all people's desires, unconscious and conscious, and it's kind of a form from people in the creation world, because this is creation. So people create, and then from that creation, this entity, you could say, is formed, and it travels around, you could say, and just does havoc, and does tap lining, you could say, or controlling people through their own desires that they've created. But it forms into like this one huge entity, and he uses that. The cow or the grog uses that, and they have a relationship. And so it's all. It's interesting how it all works together. There's you could say one, but then it splits, and it's the good, the bad, and the the desire part of life and creation. And these are all influences that we have to work with. I mean, these are all effects. And but like, I know what you're doing with this show is like, we can be cause and be conscious of what's going on and actually get beyond all this nonsense. So I hope that helps.
Okay, well, thank you, Val. And so the other part of the show, I wanted to show how most of the religions on this planet are the same. And so you have what we're familiar with is the main religion, and you on the third plane, the third heaven, and he has what we call 3 heads. You have what you call the good guy, the bad guy, and then the influence, the one that influences people. Well, here's an interesting thing. So here's Hinduism. Hinduism is a major religion. So I looked that up, and I found that Hinduism is the 3rd largest religion in the world, with nearly 1 billion adherents worldwide. Hinduism is the world's 3rd largest religion after Christianity and Islam. And Hindu often focuses on individual disciplines such as meditation, yoga, chants, burning incense, and all that. And then in recent years, Hare Krishna, New Age groups, and all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting about Hinduism, they believe that you have to do good works and have good karma in order to go to heaven and move on, and they believe in reincarnation and all that stuff. But once again, Hindu believes in the 3 heads. They have their God has 3 heads, and you have Brahma, which is the creator God. You have Vishnu, the preserver God, and Shiva, the destroyer God. So you have the good, the bad, and the preserver is probably the one who it would be the same as the influence, I would guess. So the good guy creates everything, Shiva destroys everything, and Vishnu is a preserver. In Christianity, I finally figured out why in Christianity they have the Old Testament and the New Testament combined, is because the Old Testament represents the bad God, the God that goes around destroying whole nations of people, to every man, woman, child, and even all the animals. And then you have Jesus, the good guy, who is the good head of the Trinity. And then you have the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, which is the influence. And in Christianity, you're not going very far in Christianity unless you receive the Holy Spirit, which is the influence. So once you receive the influence of the Holy Spirit, then you're totally tap-lined. You know, you're taking hook, line, and sinker, and it's pretty hard to give up that belief after you've done that. And I'm kind of running out of time now, but it's kind of interesting how these religions work with the different governments. You know, like you have the Vatican and all these organizations. They work hand in hand. I don't know if you're familiar with the Society of Jesus, which is a big part of the Catholic Church and the Black Pope. I have an article here that goes into detail. It explains how the Society of Jesus employs the services of the NSA, DHS, FEMA, OSS, ONI, FBI, CIA, DIA, DEA, the Pentagon, Department of Defense, NASA, the Federal Reserve, the Internal Revenue Service, Congress, and other federal agencies as necessary, and that's in the United States. And overseas, they use the German SS, Deutsch, the underground Abwehr DVD, the British MI6 and MI5. They use the Israeli Mossad. They use NATO, Interpol, the KGB, the Chilean DINA, and even the United Nations. And these religious organizations work directly with the governments to accomplish their missions using the highest levels of intelligence and government agencies. Well, I think I'm running out of time. There's one thing I want to say. We know that the reptilians are on a real mission to destroy this planet. And I don't know if any of you heard it yesterday. The United Nations had just completed a study, and they made an announcement yesterday that there are over 1 million species of plants and animals that are on the verge of extinction. They just made a public statement yesterday in the news. So since we're running out of time here, anybody like to add any last-minute comment or anything?
Just that you gave us so much information that there is no way you can deny what's being presented. But I think a lot of people listen to everything that's being said, but they don't speak about it because it's dangerous to their family, their jobs, even their lives. So they may be there in the background and you not know it, that they're there trying to do what we are trying to do, which is save the planet, the people on it, and to get rid of the bad reptilians. There may be more out there than we even suspect out of the 8 billion people on this planet. A lot of them know it. This broadcast goes around the world, and people tell their friends or their families about it. So, yes, this is wonderful. Thank you for being brave and stepping up and saying something. There's nobody very much out there doing that. But soon there will be, because their people are catching on that they have been deceived. And because they've been deceived, they start thinking about things. And when you start thinking about things, you have a different idea come across. And there are many, many, many good reptilians helping us as we speak, trying to save our little planet. Because saving Earth is a very, very crucial and important job. And it's quite an adventure. Thank you, Bob.
Well, thank you, Claudia. And as I say to people now, welcome to Jurassic Park. We're Jurassic Park in reverse. It's the reptilians that are designer engineering the humans, and instead of us designer engineering the reptilians in Jurassic Park. So, for anybody out there that's a UFO guy and can't figure out why the government will not reveal the truth about UFOs, about the aliens, because our government is the aliens. So that'll finish the show, and since we're running out of time, I want to finish with everybody singing New You, and we can do it all at once. There's probably countless number of people on here, and I don't know everybody's names on here. So, well, everybody on the count of three, just sing New You, and then that'll be it for our show today. So 1, 2, Claudia, you have one last thing?
No, just thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Bob.
On the count of three, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you everybody for participating.